All right, so going into round 7, I had just lost the previous game, so I was on 3 out of 6 at this point. So not a great score for me, but it wasn't that bad either. So I wasn't feeling too pessimistic or anything, and I still wanted to finish the tournament well. So I was paired against John Watson, who is, of course, international master. Many of you guys probably know him. He's written a bunch of books, and he was working for ICC for a while. He's also like reviewing books, basically pretty well-known chess player and author, and really nice guy overall. I was not happy to play him because I was supposed to play down, and his rating is lower these days than it used to be, but it didn't feel like I was really playing down. Like when you're playing someone like who has that much experience, it's like that strength doesn't really go away. So yeah, I was kind of bummed out. Like I was hoping for like an easier game, and then I'm paired with a tough opponent. But that said, I've never played John Watson before, so it was cool to play against someone who's like kind of a legend in the game. Okay, so I decided to play knight f3. He went for d5. I didn't really know what to expect because he plays a lot of different openings. Yeah, I believe his this is his FIDE rating at 2199. His USCF is probably higher, but yeah, ratings slide. You know how it is, like just especially if you're playing a lot of open tournaments, and not just any open tournaments, but like open tournaments in the United States or specifically like in California, you tend to run into a lot of underrated juniors. And that's just a losing trend. Like, there's nothing you can do about that because, for example, you're playing at 2100, but in fact they're 2300 strength, and so they're gonna draw you or even beat you a significant percentage of the time. But in the games that are rated, you're being treated as playing against the 2100. So if you're playing against like a lot of underrated juniors, your rating just tends to slide unless you yourself are continuing to improve. So it's tough. Yeah, age really, yeah, is one of the. Well, I guess yeah. I mean, it's kind of it's one of the most important factors in chess, but it's also one of the least important. Funnily enough. Okay, so he went for d5. I decided to play e3. And I also used this opening in round 5 against Grandmaster Barish Politz. So that was, I think we looked at that game yesterday. And, I mean, the idea behind this opening is to eventually play some kind of d4, c4 setup. Maybe with the bishop heading to b2. Eventually, white plays d4. This bishop typically comes out to e2 or d3. In some cases, white even ends up fianchettoing, but it's not often once you've played e3 that you end up going g3. And yeah, I mean, it's not like, it's obviously not dangerous for black, but the idea is to, let's say, challenge my opponent not so much on theoretical grounds, like how much move-by-move theory they know, but rather strategic grounds. Like what structures are they familiar with? Are they able to handle transpositions correctly? What typically happens in this line is, let's say if I'm playing a Slav player, they're going to try to play a type of Slav defense. If they're playing the Queen's Gambit decline normally against d4, they're going to play something with e6. Grunfeld or King's Indian players will typically play with fianchetto. And based on what black chooses here, white has different ways of, let's say, poking and prodding around with the move order, trying to get different lines. For instance, in the Slav and the Queen's Gambit declined, there are concrete reasons that it's better for white to get the bishop to b2 earlier before committing with d4, because then the bishop is putting pressure on this diagonal, and there are many cases when white can eventually get some kind of favorable IQP position for example. So this is kind of what we're playing for. And yes, red, in fact, I have read quite a bit of E3 Poison, and some of my repertoire comes from that book, but actually Not all of it. I had some ideas on my own as well. But yeah, I am familiar with the book, and I think it's a good one. I would recommend it on Chessable or whatever, just physical copy. So John thought for a little bit, and he ends up going G6, and yeah, now I wasn't quite sure whether he wanted to play like a Grunfeld position or a Schlechter Slav, which we would get after C4 and C6. But I played C4. This is usually how white continues, and black could take on C4 here, and then play bishop G7, and we would get a type of Grunfeld defense. But I think white maybe has some extra options here, like with queen b3, for example. We can force black to play e6 early on, and this isn't really something that black always wants to do super early in their Grunfeld. Giant Plum Cake, the name was E3 Poison by Axel Smith. Actually, it's the same author that wrote the Woodpecker Method, which I was also just working through last month. Okay, but instead, after c4, he plays c6. And I went d4. And knight f6. So we got the Schlechter Slav here, where black has played both c6 and g6. I think theoretically it's considered okay for black. It's maybe not as solid as other Slav lines, but definitely very playable. So knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e2, castles, castles. This is kind of mainline theory. Here black has a lot of options. There's a6, a5, e6, bishop g4. And John chose d takes c4, which is a big line as well. I take back, bishop g4, and now bishop e2. So this in the next move was kind of the limit of how much I knew about this position. My understanding is that white should kind of break the pin immediately, then at some point maybe can play h3, and if black takes we can recapture with the bishop, and we want to get some space with e4 next move, and then bishop e3. So that was the plan here. Black played knight bd7 and I played e4. I think it's definitely justified. And here John surprised me with the move queen a5. So at this point I was definitely just like out of book. Like I maybe had seen this position before, but I really couldn't remember one way or the other. Silver Tool, I'm drinking milk tea. One of my favorites. Okay, so queen a5. I thought a lot about e5 here, which is turns out to be probably the best move. Like knight d5, bishop d2, and then we get this type of Grunfeld. I wasn't sure like what this would be during the game, like whether it's a good version or not. It seemed like it would be fine, but looking at it after, I think white has a clear advantage here. Just like more space. Knight on d7 is kind of restricted. Bishop on g7 is restricted. White can try to play like a4 and rook b1, and well, some pressure, some space advantage. I think white has just a small edge. Maybe a little bit more. So after queen a5, yeah, I spent some time here. Eventually I decided just to go bishop e3. I lost the last game, so I don't know. I was kind of feeling just like, let's just play solid, not go anything like too aggressive too early, and just try to keep the situation under control. He goes rook fd8. I don't like this move. I think it's a little bit slow. I was expecting him to just take on f3 immediately, which black often does because they're trying to fight for the e5 square. And here I don't think white can really get more than just a small advantage. Maybe I play like queen b3 or something just to keep the tension. I have the two bishops, and that might be good in the long run, but black has a pretty nice configuration to kind of like fight against the two bishops. Like the knight on d7 is always ready to use the e5 square, this knight on f6 is always coordinated, and like bishop on g7 is going to be a good piece in the long run. So as far as positions go when you're playing like against the two bishops, I think it's a pretty decent version for black. But okay, he wanted to just keep more tension in the game, so he didn't want to give up the bishop immediately. Also, he's waiting for me maybe to play h3, and then he'll take and push e5 and win a tempo. But there's no reason for me to play h3, so I decided to just get on with my development and queen b3. And this move actually comes with a potential threat, because now that the rook has left the f8 square, I have potential knight g5 ideas, which would be very annoying for black, because I'm hitting the f7 pawn, and then if black has to defend it, I'll play f3, and then the bishop on g4 is going to get trapped. So this is an annoying threat for black to deal with. So he played queen b6, trying to exchange queens. And I considered going for an endgame here, because at this point I feel like white is close to being able to fight for an advantage. Mainly because the center has so far gone unchallenged, and so the longer I can keep the center, I think the better my chances get. But then I realized that actually the black's queen on b6 is kind of awkwardly placed against my bishop on e3. So if I just move my queen away, then it's still going to be very hard for black to achieve one of his breaks. I mean, mainly black is trying to play either e5 or c5. In e5 is really just out of the question. With the bishop on e3, c5 might be possible, but clearly looks risky, and from a positional point of view, c5 is not as good for black, because then white always has his option to play e5 and just gain some space there. So yeah, Z Nation, your move queen a3, I think this would be quite reasonable. I decided to play queen c2, but I'm sure you guys understand the idea by now, just keeping the queens on the board, and keeping it very difficult for black to play either one of these breaks. I think I just wanted to keep the queen centralized and defending the e4 pawn. Okay, so rook a c8. And now I just, I think what happened was like I just couldn't decide where to put my rooks. Because I could put it on c1 and d1, I can do d1, e1. Maybe I could try to do e1, f1 and then push with like f4, e5 one day. So eventually I decided just to play h3. It's like, I don't know what to do with my rook, so let me make this move, clarify the situation, just get the two bishops. And I think this is a good decision here, because now it's black to move, and black still can't play e5, and c5 is going to be very risky here. I might just run into immediate e5 or something, or just d5 at the minimum. So he went queen a5. I think this is reasonable. He has to move his queen if he ever wants to play e5. And I decided to play bishop e2. This is a pretty standard, let's say, prophylactic move, because now if black plays e5, de, knight takes e5, my bishop is not hanging on f3, and I can immediately kick him back with f4. And this is usually what we want to do when we're like fighting for the space advantage. Then, for example, like knight d7, rook a d1, and I think here white has kind of a clear edge, because the pawns in the center are mobile. We have e5 coming, maybe f5 one day, or e6 trying to like weaken the king side, and light squared bishop in this position I think is quite good. Also, this knight can maybe jump to e4 and d6 one day. So something like this I think would be very favorable for white. Okay, so instead he goes c5, and I was definitely fine with that. I pushed d5. And now we have like a Benoni type of position, but I feel like it's a good version of the Benoni for white, because black doesn't have this open e-file, so he hasn't played e6, and so this gives kind of black less defense against white just advancing f4, e5. And that's kind of the plan, like f4, bishop f3, e5, and so on. He pushed c4, Okay, so he's just trying to get queenside counterplay, but I felt like it was going to be too slow. Rook a d1. So now I'm just defending the d5 pawn because one day I want to push e5. He goes b5 and a3. I think this is pretty normal. So if he wants to go b4, he's going to have to split his pawns to achieve this. And well, now my b2 pawn is certainly a weakness, but pawn on c4, pawn on a7, these guys are weak as well, and I think the position really favors white's two bishops now. They're just placed perfectly here. Although eventually black kind of has to do this, and he does in the game, like literally one move later. He starts with knight b6. I go f4, and now b4, because he just doesn't have any other moves that look worthwhile. He can, let's say, bring the other knight to c5. White probably goes e5, knight c5. And yeah, it's not really clear what black's next move here is, because like the knight on b3 is, again, it's not clear what the next move is, so it's hard for black to achieve something here. Maybe white can go even slow, like king h1 or h4, h5, but the space advantage I think is definitely in white's favor here. Komaromi asked, does he not play a5, b4? Because there's no other square for the queen to defend b5 from. Yeah, it would be very hard to achieve. It would just take him too many moves to get this in. I think I understand what you're asking, like to play b4 and then take with the pawn. But yeah, like he would have to play queen a6, queen b7, and then a5, and it's like 3 extra moves. Meanwhile, I'm going to play f4, e5 very quickly, so yeah, it just doesn't feel like black has time for this. Exactly. But actually, so amazingly, the game got away from me extremely quickly. It was quite weird, but I think still interesting. So I took queen takes b4, bishop f3. Now I'm ready to roll with e5, and at this point, I mean, I do feel like white has a great position here. Knight d7, e5, and knight c5. So to his credit, I think he's putting up really good resistance, because now since I played bishop f3, he does have this d3 square for the knight, which felt kind of annoying, and like black can really use this one. It blocks my rook and attacks b2. And I felt like this was a critical moment, like to figure out what exactly I should do here. Because I thought I mean, I don't have all the time in the world. He wants to play knight d3, maybe rook b8, and then move this knight and hit b2. So yeah, I really wasn't sure. In fact, I did consider for a while just to play somewhat slowly, like just play rook d2, for example, knight d3. Now there's no threat just yet, so I can continue improving my position. I can also consider a move like bishop e4, where I may be threatening just to take and win this pawn, and so black has to, like, probably has to go back to c5. And then I think white just keeps the situation under control. I can even give back one of the bishops just to make sure that black isn't getting counterplay. So in hindsight, I should have done something like this, or even a move like h4. In fact, I think is perfectly good here for white, mainly just trying to create some kind of weakness on the king side, just playing h5, taking on g6, and then once black recaptures, then maybe g4 or f5. And well, if white is able to like open the f file, for example, then there could be a lot of play against black's king, especially since a lot of black's pieces are on the queen side. So I had this kind of feeling in mind that I should be trying to create something on the king side. So the main move I started to consider here was the move f5, which, you know, the more I calculated, actually the more I liked. And I ended up playing it. Now the move is a definite pawn sacrifice, because black can simply grab this pawn on e5, and okay, at first glance it's not immediately clear what white is getting for this pawn. But okay, the advantages, of course, is that it sharpens the game immediately. I mean, puts a lot of pressure onto black, and I think gives white a lot of chances just to win the game outright. Like if black makes a mistake here, then it could be game over. So the point was, after bishop takes e5 to take on g6. Now black has a choice about how to recapture, but as you can see, we've gotten the f-file opened up, and white is going to be getting some tactics here. FG is possible, but it seems kind of anti-positional to capture away from the center and also give up the light squares. So after f takes g4, bishop g4, for example, already it feels very dangerous for black to give up these light squares, and it's clear that white has, at minimum, just like very serious compensation here. But once you see that white also has a move like queen f2 incoming, then it quickly turns from compensation into just a very, very dangerous attack. So black took hg, and now bishop g4. And so I'd seen this in advance, and I had a lot of very, very nice tactics in mind here that unfortunately none of which appeared on the board, as always. Because there's actually a ton of danger for black in this position. So for example, okay, if black plays rook c7, which seems like a very normal move, white has a really nice tactical shot here, and I'll give you guys a chance to find it in the chat. YouTube audience, you can pause the video and try to see if you can spot it. So I think it's a pretty nice shot. Yeah, and Komaromi has spotted it. See, this is someone who was around during the woodpecker days, so he's he's seen a lot of tactics at this point. Bishop e6, exactly, and just totally crushing, killing black's position. Okay, a few ideas here. Number one, we're threatening queen takes g6 as well as taking on f7. If black takes the bishop, then the king opens up and the attack is just devastating. So bishop g7, rook f7, it's just immediately game over. And so black is getting mated here. And if knight takes e6, d takes e6, then because this rook is on c7, rook on d8 is hanging, pawn on f7 is hanging with check. And so rook takes d1, white will take on f7. And in fact, we might not even need to take this rook back at all, because like king f8, bishop h6, white is just winning on the spot and just promoting. So yeah, bishop e6 is just ending the game. So this was one nice idea. If black plays rook b8, now bishop e6, actually this line doesn't quite work as well, because black's rook on d8 is protected, so black can go for knight takes e6. But here, because the rook left the c-file, white has queen f2, hitting the knight and then also hitting f7, so nice little double attack. And black doesn't really have a good way to defend both, and game over. So yeah, but then if not that, then what else? Like if black can't move the rook, I was also thinking about f5, but as soon as you see f5, I mean, it doesn't take too long to just consider the immediate sacrifice, and once you think about it for a little bit, it immediately feels like it should be good, because black's pieces are just way too far from the king side. Queen especially has no way of getting back to the defense, and white immediately has like 3 pieces ready to attack, and against an empty king, it's really, it's clearly very dangerous for black. You could calculate further and make sure that you're actually winning here in all lines, but intuitively it feels like, you know, queen f7 check, rook f5 should be game over. Okay, so yeah, everything looks good, right? But it turns out black has a fantastic resource here that solves all of their problems, and I think this would be a good exercise as well. So I mean, attacking is important, but defense is probably just as important. So black to play. How should black handle the problems here? So Matthias wants rook d6, but yeah, I don't think this is working. We can take on c8 and then go queen f2, and yeah, hitting both. Knight bd7 from Crushing Fatal Blow. Yeah, this is definitely a move that actually is a very natural defensive move. The problem with this one is that, again, it runs into queen f2, which is a key resource for white in all these lines. So hitting f7, hitting c5, if black goes rook f8, then white can take on c5 here, and is winning material because of the pin. So knight takes c5, we take on c8, and black can't even recapture this one because then f7 falls with check, and that's super dangerous. And if black takes on c5 with anything else, then white is taking on d7 and is going to be up a piece. So this is actually a good try, but this queen f2 is just absolutely devastating. Okay, so anyone else? I'll give you guys one last chance here. How should black deal with the issues in their position? Okay, Silver Tool says knight cd7. And I think this runs into the same bishop e6. Not 100% sure, but this would be my first guess. And the problem with this move is that it's just creating too many threats. So if all you needed to do was defend g6, then you could play like king g7 or knight f8. But the issue is that black has to defend both g6 and f7, and it's just not possible. But no, Z Nation, actually you figured out the only way to actually keep the game going. Knight d3, absolutely. So giving up the exchange, but at the same time gaining control over a lot of important squares. Specifically, shutting down white's queen here is a huge win for black, because now I have zero ideas with bishop e6. This no longer is working, and I don't have queen f2 anymore. So I have no active way of like activating the queen. So in fact, even if you're skeptical about the compensation that black is getting here, which we'll discuss in a second, it's still, I mean, compared to everything else, it looks so much better, because here, black is not really on the defensive and doesn't have to deal with like this barrage of tactics on every move. So even if objectively black is going to be worse here, which again we're going to discuss in a second, even if black somehow ends up worse, then at least the practical chances are on your side, because the position will be a lot easier to play. And the character of the position is also changing. So we've gone from a position where we were like super excited with all these tactics. I was just I was so ready to play bishop e6 on the board, and now we're transitioning into a position where maybe I have to find some kind of technical way to convert the exchange, or try to like limit my opponent's counterplay. He's going to get the initiative now. It was a very, very unpleasant turn of events. So okay, in fact, this move actually gives black the advantage, because if I do take this rook, then after knight takes c8, I mean, so far black has one pawn for the exchange, which is normally not exactly enough, but black has also a lot of positional advantages in return for getting the light squared bishop off the board. So okay, number one, the knight can come to d6, and it's like all three of black's minor pieces are incredibly strong here. Black also has this target with the b2 pawn that I don't think white is going to be able to hold. And yeah, so it's like all of a sudden black has all the prospects in the position, and white basically has no ideas, no way to generate a single threat. And the d pawn also, yeah, is in fact weak and could be easily picked up. I mean, I have to strongly consider taking on d3 and just trying to give back the exchange and equalizing, but I'm not sure that white even equalizes here because black will always be winning the b2 pawn at least. So this seemed like white, okay, maybe holds, but it's clear that black is the one who's actually pushing here. So I was really kicking myself because, like, you know, just 3 moves ago everything was under control. You know, there was very little risk in the position. I had a nice space advantage, and so I went for the initiative and for the tactics, and most of the lines were working, but unfortunately, you know, my opponent found the one line that it's actually just posing white serious problems, and I was definitely regretting not considering this more. But what can you do? I mean, we were already spending a lot of time and on the verge of time trouble, so yeah, decisions had to be made. Okay, so now I realized, of course, that I had messed it up, and I'm definitely no longer better, but maybe I still have some chances. So I decided to play bishop c1. The point of this move was to defend the b2 pawn, and it was kind of setting a trap. I didn't really think he was gonna fall for it, but okay, it was in the position. So if black plays knight takes c1, then again white has this move bishop e6, and this would be again extremely annoying for black to deal with. I'm not 100% sure if white is exactly winning here or not, but it clearly looks very, very dangerous. And yeah, actually I don't see what black does here. I think it's because this line is still on the board and super dangerous, and black can give this check but doesn't have a way to get the queen back into the defense. So I think it's pretty bad for black. But okay, he didn't fall for it. Instead he played bishop takes c3, which he didn't have to, but I can understand why he did, because he's clarifying the situation, and with this trade he's going to be able to pick up the d5 pawn. So yeah, actually what Komoromi says is absolutely correct and applies to this situation as well. So number one, yeah, trading this knight off for this bishop is probably not a good idea unless you're, you know, collecting something like the b2 pawn. And by the same token, trading the dark squared bishop for white's knight on c3, which has so far just been a passive piece, is definitely not something to be done unless you're very sure you want to take the d5 pawn, which he does end up taking. So queen c5 check, king h1, and here I thought he was going to take on d5, and okay, finally I would probably take the exchange, because at this point white is kind of out of ideas here, and so I should just grab material and hope for the best. And yeah, okay, black would have I think a significant advantage here. Now black has 2 pawns for the exchange, and the knight on d3 is still very strong, so this would be an uphill battle for white for sure. But instead he just plays rook b8. He's like, you know what, you had your chance, but now I'm going to keep my rooks, thank you very much, and good luck with your attack, but I'm now a pawn up, and I'm about to take your second pawn on d5, and yeah, you know, good luck with everything. And so now white is in big trouble. My only hope here was that we were both kind of in time trouble. I think we had less than 10 minutes to make 10 moves with the 30-second increment, so I could at least get my pieces closer to the king side and try to provoke some weakness and see if I can get anything done. So I played bishop h6. I mean, like, might as well activate the bishop. Clearly it's going to be useful on h6. He goes queen takes d5. I was definitely surprised by this move. I was greatly expecting knight takes d5 here, where white's ideas really run out quickly because black is ready to just plant the knight on f6, and then, I mean, white is just not going to be able to do anything. I can sack on f6, but then I'm gonna be out of pieces. I won't be able to create anything. But he decides to take with the queen. I think maybe he was trying to keep f7 under control, like trying to avoid any kind of rook takes f7. I played queen e2. This was the only move I could really see that improves my position, just trying to get the queen in. Okay, attacking the pawn. If he lets me take this one, maybe I can get my queen to f6 and miraculously win. Yeah, I'm not sure actually what move I was expecting here. I thought maybe queen d6 was was probably what he was going to play, and then my next move would be queen f3. And just again, okay, attacking the pawn and asking black, how are you going to defend this one? If f5, then I think I'm still ready to sacrifice and open up black's king. I wasn't exactly sure during the game like what the evaluation is here. I just felt like it would be messy, but yeah, it turns out after queen h5, white has, I think, at least enough for a draw here, like some kind of perpetual check, which at this point I would have been extremely happy with, because I felt like I'm just down material for nothing, like down 2 pawns, and yeah, at that point a draw would be absolutely a very fortunate result, because I felt like I should be just losing. Hey, Spy Hunter 357, thanks for following. So yeah, I was not sure exactly what to make of that position, or if we would even get there. But then he goes queen e5, which I actually just didn't expect, but then once he put it on the board, it suddenly started to make sense. And I think I only had like 3 or 4 minutes here to make like 9 more moves. So I really didn't have a lot of time to calculate. So I was thinking about queen f3 and trying to again attack f7, and then figuring out, okay, what's going on after f5. That didn't look clear at all. Then I thought maybe I have some chances with some tactics, like for example, somehow I felt if I have queen e5, knight e5, bishop f4, maybe it's a little bit awkward for him, because like it's pinned and then the rook on d8 is hanging. And then I kind of noticed the trick. Yeah, so Matthias, you figured it out. YouTube audience, if you want to pause and find the win here for white, I would encourage you guys to do so. But yeah, rook takes d3 is just a miracle, winning the game. So yeah, like it was very weird actually. Like I was considering some other line, or I think I was considering like the immediate bishop f4 or something, because if knight takes f4, then the queen is hanging. But then I saw, well, bishop f4, okay, it almost works, but he has queen takes e2, and so that doesn't work for white. And then yeah, I just noticed like, oh yeah, knight is only the knight is defending the queen, and so when you have this kind of thing, it's like when a piece is only defended by one other piece and that piece is like under attack, like immediately it should trigger some kind of tactical reaction. Yeah, actually this is a very forcing move. Yeah, Z Nation, you're totally correct. It should have been the first on my list. But okay, I mean, I had like 3 minutes left, you know. I already burned all my time in the previous positions looking for tactics that weren't there, and I really, yeah, wasn't expecting to get handed a gift. Okay, but the move does win, because now after queen takes e2, I have rook takes d8 with check. This is just the key detail that that black missed. Rook takes, bishop takes e2, and black has 2 pawns for the piece, but it's really not enough here. White's 2 bishops are really strong, and importantly, it's very hard for black to even get to the c3 pawn. Like if knight a4, then we're just taking on c4 and we're hitting f7, and so it's definitely a kind of a hopeless battle here. So he played queen c7, and now white has a lot of excellent moves here. I think rook takes f7 is actually mate in 9 according to Stockfish. I wasn't quite keen on just like sacrificing like the minute I'm back in the game, just immediately sacrificing. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I just decided to play just simple move rook df3, hitting f7. He doesn't have rook f8, and here he decided to resign because after, for example, if he plays a move like f5, then okay, now I will sacrifice, because it's not too difficult to see, at least intuitively feel or just calculate it out, that this is going to be leading to a mating attack for white. Like queen is coming to f7, rook takes f5, and so black is just getting mated here, and basically it's game over. I think king h8, we can even go bishop g7, for example. just to get the king even closer. But okay, I don't think it's necessary. Probably just rook takes f5 or queen f7, and yeah, just game over. So he didn't want to see that over the board, and just resigned, and that was it. So yeah, obviously I had very mixed feelings about this game. I mean, on one hand, I felt like I had won the opening battle. I had such a nice position after, let's say, 15 moves or so. Around here with the 2 bishops and nice center. But yeah, I think just in this complex middle game, I mean, things happened, and I was a bit overzealous with this f5. I mean, sacrificing 1 pawn, but then yeah, missing my opponent's like counter exchange sacrifice was kind of a big deal. So I definitely just deserved to lose this game, and was expecting to for a little while there. And yeah, I felt like it was basically just a pretty lucky break. Okay, well, that brings us to round 8. Nevertheless, a win is a win. So I took my point. I definitely didn't consider giving it back. So I'm on 4 out of 7 now, round 8. I was paired against Eric Lee, who's a junior in, actually lives in the Bay Area, and we've played a couple times. The first time we played was actually earlier this year in January. We played in the Bay Area International, and here we actually have the same... Actually, sorry, we didn't play in that tournament. We played in the U.S. Amateur Team West, which was 1 month later. I think back in February, and we had the same colors, and we basically played the same opening, King's Indian. And in that game, he actually played the H3 variation, and I ended up winning. And then we played again in the Rapid tournament at the Mechanics Chess Club, which was like game 15 or something. And there he played the Samish variation, and he ended up winning that game. And so in this game, he chooses the Samish again. So I wasn't sure which one he's going to go for, F3 or H3. But I was not too unhappy to see it, because I felt like I could still fight for a good position here. So bishop e3. Now black has a lot of ideas. There's e5 and c5 and knight c6, knight bd7, even a6 is a move, c6. I decided to play b6, which is kind of a sideline, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think this game actually is pretty instructive for any King's Indian or even Benoni players out there, because black's idea is to play c5 and eventually coax white into pushing d5 and going for a Benoni type of position with like e6 and taking on d5. Okay, so he goes queen d2. I push c5 and knight g2. So he's developing, I would say, pretty normally. White could push d5 earlier. I would go e6 and we would get this Benoni. I think probably white should objectively do this and play a move like knight e2, for example, or even I would say playing knight e2 first, just to save some time. For example, c5, d5, e6. Let's say knight g3, takes, and black's usual idea here is to play bishop a6 and trade off these bishops. This is kind of one of the points behind playing b6 so early. And here, white can trade the bishops on a6, or white can play bishop e2. But the main point we'll see compared to the game is that in the game, black is able to take on f1 and force white to like move the rook and lose time castling by hand. Whereas here, white gets to castle in one move, which is always a luxury, and basically gets a better version of the same variation on the board. In the game, I feel like black got a very, very comfortable position right out of the opening. So you guys you'll see what I'm talking about. So queen d2, c5, knight e2. I played bishop a6. It looks kind of weird playing this move so early against the c4 pawn, since white can just play b3, and that's what he does. But black has has this idea to really just force white to eventually push d5. So I pushed e6 here, and now I'm just ready for him to play d5 so I can just take it. And the problem for white is that it's hard to develop without committing to this move. Because in order to complete development, white needs to get the bishop out. In order to do that, white needs to move the knight. But if white moves the knight somewhere, let's say g3 or f4, then when black takes on d4, white would really like to be able to capture with the knight here. Taking with the bishop is okay, but then it kind of just runs into knight c6, just losing this tempo. And then we get a pretty weird Marazzi bind type of structure, but I don't think it's a particularly good version for white. Especially like this knight on g3 is not well placed, and black has pretty quick counterplay with rook c8 or playing for d5 somewhere. And yeah, basically, long story short, not a great version for white. So white can't really move this knight away if black is threatening to take on d4, and that means that white has to either push d5 or just play with the knight on e2. So it's not so easy for white to complete their development here. He played rook d1, which I believe is still the main move in the position according to theory. Just improving the rook, supporting the center one more time, lining up against the d6 pawn. And now I play knight c6. So once again, I'm putting a lot of pressure. If the knight moves away, then he's going to have to give up his dark squared bishop, which is not what white wants to do. If he takes on c5, then black will play dc, and I'm fully ready to challenge for the d-file. And in the long run, strategically, it's very nice for me that I have this d5 square under control, because white isn't able to use this one, but black is going to be able to use all the dark squares in the center. Okay, so instead he pushes d5, and I think this is the right way to go. This is definitely more ambitious. I played e takes d5, and now c d5, which I think at this point is actually a mistake. Probably white should have just played e takes d5, going for this kind of symmetrical Benoni structure. And then after knight e5, I mean, I think both sides are okay here. The position is kind of balanced. White is going to play knight g3, bishop e2, castles. Black will move this knight away, maybe to e8, and then push f5. And it'll be a pretty sharp battle on the king side. Both sides have their advantages and disadvantages. Like, I think black's pieces are nicely coordinated, but the bishop on a6 in this particular line does end up being misplaced, and in many cases black has to kind of reroute it back to like c8 and d7. But apart from that, I think black has a pretty decent position. Okay, so he goes c takes d5, which is more natural, but the issue here is after knight e5, he can't really finish his development without letting me take on f1. So this is a problem for white, I think. He goes knight c1, bishop takes f1, rook takes f1, and now he needs two moves to get his king to g1, which is a lot of tempi in a Benoni. I mean, Benonis are usually pretty sharp, every move counts, and so white's plan in these types of positions is normally to try and develop actively in the center and play like h3, f4, put the queen on f3 somehow, and push e5 very, very aggressively. But he's like 5-6 moves away from being able to achieve that. In the meantime, black is very ready to just achieve the main plan of expanding on the queen side. So as far as Benonis go, this is like a dream version, and black is already like slightly better. Maybe just even more than that, like 0.5, 0.6 and up. So yeah, I felt very comfortable here. I played a6 immediately because while he's spending time getting the king to g1, I can make these advances. He goes a4, and actually I could have just played b5 here right away. I definitely considered this move. It's a pretty typical, like, let's say Benko Gambit style pawn sacrifice. I mean, the main reason I didn't want to do it is not for any particular chess reason. Like, I didn't see a reason that this was bad. If white accepts the pawn, the problem is black can go queen b8 or queen b6. The knight has to drop back to c3. And then black has this idea to push c4, which is a pretty typical break in like Benko type positions. Threatening the b3 pawn, potentially threatening knight d3 check, and also white does not have a way out with bc4, knight c4, because here, when black gets to grab this dark squared bishop, white is just way underdeveloped to deal with this, and so the play on the dark squares is just way too dangerous. So for example, like queen b4, and the next move is like rook fc8, or maybe some kind of discovery with the knight, and yeah, basically white is very hard pressed to survive this kind of attack. So yeah, I mean, that clearly was like very nice for black. I mean, black just gets a dream banco now. But the problem is, you know, in the previous rapid game that we played, I made a similar sacrifice in a very similar type of position, because it was basically the same opening. And it was a good sacrifice, but then the game didn't work out. Like, I ended up losing. And so I just, like, that affected me psychologically. I didn't want to make the same sacrifice under similar conditions, you know, and then like something doesn't work out and then I end up down a pawn. It was a bit silly. I mean, objectively, there's like really nothing wrong with the move, and I mean, I should have just played it if I understood that, you know, it was a good move to play. But I also felt like, okay, practically my position is good. It's not strictly necessary that I have to sacrifice a pawn and try to win right from the opening. I can just play rook b8 here. I'm still getting b5 in. The position is still very nice for black, and I'm not taking any risk. So, you know, why should this be so bad? So, okay, I decided to play rook b8. You know, unlike the previous game where I felt like I kind of rushed too quickly to try to, like, capitalize on the initiative, here I decided to just take it slow and just handle my position like as if, you know, I'm just trying to play a normal game. Okay, so he goes king f2, b5, and king g1. So we kind of achieve our plans. Oh, Z Nation, you're watching Svidler's Archangel series on Chess24. Yeah, I've seen some of it. He's, I mean, obviously a very good, very strong presenter, and he knows a ton about those lines, so that's awesome. Okay, now I was trying to figure out how to play this type of position. I felt like I had a lot of reasonable ideas here. I mainly just wanted to figure out, okay, on what squares do my pieces belong. Eventually I came up with queen a5. This made sense to me, just putting pressure on the knight on c3, putting pressure on the queen side, activating the queen, and opening up the rook to come to c8, where I felt like, okay, then my pieces will just be perfectly coordinated. So he goes ab5, knight d3, and I wasn't too concerned about exchanging pieces here, because I felt like with exchanges my position has the potential to actually improve. And the reason for that, I think, is because in the long run, and every Benoni player should definitely know this, or if you're like a King's Indian player, you know, you might be playing the Benoni structure at some point, so this is useful to know as well. In the long run, black always has the potential to make a queenside passer, and the outside pass pawn is typically stronger with less and less pieces on the board. With a ton of pieces on the board, it's very hard to push a pass pawn because there are just too many pieces, it's going to get lost. With fewer pieces on the board, this pawn actually becomes stronger, and more pieces have to like defend against it, and as a result of this, I think it can turn into a bigger advantage. And so yeah, I didn't mind piece trades because I just felt like, okay, I'm going to get some endgame with a very strong dark squared bishop that's going to be dominating the queen side. And so my dream endgame is rook and bishop against rook and anything. Because even if white is left with the bishop, my bishop will be stronger. If white is left with the knight, my bishop will be dominating the knight. So I don't really care. Rook and bishop against rook and anything, and black should have a super comfortable endgame. So despite wanting to, you know, definitely win this game, I realized I should just play in a technical style. So I took on d3, queen takes d3, and I came up with this move knight g4, which doesn't really win anything. It's actually just a simplification tactic, but I think it's a really strong move. A move like knight d7 would have also been good here, just bringing the knight to e5, and then I think black just has a very comfortable position. Again, rook fc8 and then c4 coming. But I like knight g4 because it's, again, simplifying and forcing exchanges and leading to a good endgame. So, okay, main problem for white is that two pieces are hanging. If this bishop drops back to d2, then black has bishop d4 check, and then knight f2, is winning the exchange, so this is not really playable for white. If he goes knight e2, then after I take on e3, my dark square bishop becomes even stronger, and I think black can immediately play c4 here and just have a really nice position. I think the engine was also pointing out, instead of knight takes c3, I could start with c4, which is even stronger. I'm not sure if I would have found this one. Maybe if I took a closer look at the position, I could have spotted it. But the main point is that, okay, the queen has to stay in contact with the bishop, and then after queen d2, black gets c3 in, and so black is just pushing the pawn very, very quickly, and this pawn will be very easy to support because black just has all of their pieces just kind of dominating on the queen side. So, okay, Eric goes for the final option, which he kind of has to. He just takes on g4, and then I play queen takes c3, queen takes c3, and bishop takes c3. And I was very happy with this turn of events because I felt like, okay, I got my endgame where I have this outside pass pawn, and even better, I forced white to play f takes g4, so now the e4 pawn is this huge weakness, and white's structure has been severely weakened here. So I was feeling very optimistic about my chances. I felt like not only do I have a clear plan, it's just I have a lot of weaknesses to target, and it's not easy to play white's position. He ends up going for rook f3, which I thought was natural. The idea is to double on the f-file, or at least threaten to, and try to put pressure on black's one of black's weaknesses. He also has ideas of bishop f4 and targeting this pawn. I played b4. I had it very strongly in my mind, not to rush when trying to convert this kind of position. It's like very important just to make sure that you're slowly improving your position. You're not looking for any kind of knockout if there isn't one, and you're just trying to slowly improve, come up with some kind of plan, improve your pieces, figure out what to exchange, improve your king, and just convert nice and easy. So yeah, my idea was just to, again, slowly improve my position. I came up with a nice setup here. What white should have done, actually, Z Nation, for example, like f6, king g7, and then moving the rook over. I think this would be an example of like a pretty decent plan. We would want to be careful that like white can't double with the rooks and play g5. So I'm not sure, it might be possible, or we might even play g5 ourselves and kind of block them. But yeah, this is kind of what we're looking for, just trying to extinguish any counterplay, stop it before it starts, kind of thing. And once there's no counterplay, just find a way to continue improving the position. And it's normally very difficult for the defending side to do something or continue making moves without kind of like weakening their position in the long run. So he goes for rook f1 here. I thought this was natural, but this turns out to be kind of a losing move. I think bishop d2 was better, something like this. Just challenging my bishop. I don't want to trade just yet. I'll probably go back to g7. And then maybe bishop f4. And white has a little bit more space. I'm not sure how big black's advantage is here, but black is clearly still pressing. But okay, he played rook f1. I played rook b7, bishop f4, and rook d7. So this is actually the construction that I'm most proud of finding in this game. I mean, it looks a little bit passive, obviously, but the point is that I'm going to use my one rook to defend both of my weaknesses, and white is going to have to use both of his rooks to even put pressure on f7, or his bishop to put pressure on d6. And even if he, let's say, leaves his bishop on g3, so he's attacking both at the same time, white is not going to be threatening anything, because he can't go bishop d6, rook f7, he doesn't really get anything there. And so that means that my rook is free to go to a8 and then go to like a3 or a2 and activate itself this way. And even though this one rook is passive, well, it's kind of fighting against three of white's pieces, so it's clearly pulling its weight. I've always considered this principle as kind of like a economy of defense kind of thing. think it comes from the Soviet chess school. I'm not totally sure on that, but it's like you know, you want your defense to be as economic as possible. The fewest number of pieces doing the most amount of defensive work is kind of what you're looking for in this type of situation. And what this does is, okay, it obviously frees up the rest of your pieces to then be active, and it's a very difficult situation now for white to play. Like in this position, for example, rook e8 is already a threat, because he doesn't have a great way to defend the e4 pawn. There's no rook e1, and there's also no rook e3 because of bishop d4. So already black is threatening to just win outright. He ends up going king h1 here, and his point is that now rook e8 he can play rook e3, but this comes at the drawback of really weakening the placement of white's king. Now he has potential back rank issues, and generally his king is just farther from where it needs to be, which is like d3 or c4, trying to kind of fight against black's pieces. Okay, so I was definitely very happy here with the situation. I played rook a8. He goes g5. And yeah, now I wasn't sure exactly how to proceed. I thought if I play rook a3, he's probably going to play rook b1. And I didn't really see what my next move is here. What black is often trying to do is like break with the c4 and then b3, b2 and get the passed pawn going. But it's very hard to do this with my bishop hanging on c3. So eventually I realized that actually if I could trade a pair of rooks, then I would have a lot more chances of promoting the pawn. Because if we just imagine a pair of rooks comes off the board, then when black plays c4, takes, and tries to push b3, it's going to be very difficult for white to, let's say, keep attacking the bishop and keep the back rank defended, because black always has ideas of playing like rook a7, white will have to defend the back rank, and then b3, b2, and rook a1 and promoting the pawn. So I realized kind of what I mentioned earlier, that if I trade off a pair of rooks, the passed pawn actually becomes a lot more difficult for white to deal with. So then I started considering rook a1 for a while, and I was almost ready to play it. I don't know, I just felt like, okay, I get to trade rooks, but then I kind of lose time with putting my bishop on a1, and maybe white has time to organize some counterplay with rook e3 and e5 and trying to create this passed pawn in the center. I think black is still better here, but I wanted to look for more. And then yeah, actually I figured out that rook a2 was the right move. Not so much to dominate the second rank. Actually, one idea is to play rook e2 and go after the e4 pawn this way, which would be really annoying for white to deal with. But the main point behind this move was actually just to provoke white into playing rook f2, like trying to trade off a pair of rooks, which is actually exactly what I'm hoping for in the position. So yeah, it's hard to blame Eric because he did end up playing rook f2. It's not easy to come up with another move for white because rook e2, rook b2, these moves are just coming, and it's going to be difficult for white to hold the pawns. So he plays rook f2, and then I snap, trade off this rook, rook takes f2, and I start with rook a7. Actually, the immediate c4 was also already very strong, but I decided, okay, just to threaten the back rank check, get the open file, and okay, see what move he makes. Not that it really matters here at this point. White is basically just losing by force. He goes g3. I think, okay, it's probably the best move, just giving a chance for his king to start getting back into the game. But unfortunately, he's not in time. So c4. And this is, okay, I think I did this right, because just a few moves ago I was talking about the concept of like do not hurry, not rushing to make anything happen in the endgame immediately, but here I realized like, okay, it's just a concrete win, so it's not really about playing the endgame in a particular style. Now it's strictly about calculation. If you can calculate it out to the end, then it's just game over. I wouldn't even say it's like about principles or anything like that. It's just that chess is a concrete game. I think that's kind of what we've been hearing a lot lately. It's like, you know, sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. So you have to just calculate to figure out in which situations is it working and in which situations is it not, and that's kind of it. The more you do, the better you get at it. So yeah, now the b pawn is just going to be incredibly strong. White took b3. And the main thing is that he doesn't even have a way to give up his bishop for the pawn, because bishop c1 is just going to run into rook a1, then rook f1, b2. It's just game over. So yeah, basically white is just lost. Rook f1, I play b2, then I go rook a1, and he has no way of defending. So he took on d6, and yeah, I think I was accurate here until the very end. A lot of players would just play b2, and this forces white to give up the rooks, but I guess I'm kind of lazy. You know, I didn't want to play this position when all of a sudden I have to like deal with these passed pawns, and you know, who knows what's happening here. Like, my king is cut off, he has like c6, c7, bishop moves, d6. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's winning for black, or I was pretty sure, and indeed it is. But I think my way was just cleaner. Rook a2, which challenges white's rook. If he takes, then I'm just promoting into a queen. So here I'm actually not even letting white sacrifice his rook for the pawn, because if he goes rook f1, then I go b2, and he's not in time even to go rook b1, rook a1. So the pawn is promoting here, and I don't have to figure out some kind of puzzle at the end. So yeah, that was basically the end of the game. He played king g2. I simply traded rooks and pushed, and promoted the pawn, won the game, and that was it. Yeah, passed pawns are dangerous. Connected passed pawns, they're not fun. I mean, sometimes, you know, you do what you have to do, and you have to play against them. So be it. But yeah, if I think the bigger point there was just that if there's an easier way to convert the position, then it's worth 1 or 2 minutes of your time to calculate a cleaner win, versus just being materialistic and just trying to grab the rook immediately. In this case, I think I saved like 10-15 moves off the game, just by spending a little bit of time there and figuring out the most accurate way to win. But overall, I was really happy with this game. I felt like it was just super clean start to finish. I think this game and my first game were probably the best games of the tournament. Okay, so that brings us to the final round. So at this point, I was on 5 points out of 8, which was a good score for me. And I was paired against Grandmaster Vladimir Belarus, who is really strong player out of Russia. He immigrated here, I think, a few years ago, and has been attending school in Texas. And we actually played once before. We played in the Chicago Open a few years ago. He ended up winning that game. We had the same colors. I was white, he was black, and it was a very similar opening. We had this kind of weird King's Indian Benoni type of position, similar to the last game. And yeah, in that game, I think I played a little bit too timidly, and he kind of got an advantage in the middle game, and then slowly pressed, and eventually just kind of outplayed me and ground me down. And he actually ended up winning that tournament, so that was a very good Chicago Open for him. Okay, but in this tournament, he wasn't quite doing as well, because 5 out of 8 for me was a good score. For him, I think it was probably not what he was hoping for. So I felt like, you know, I definitely had chances here, because it's the last round. He's not having a particularly good tournament. He might be, you know, exhausted. So I should definitely be ambitious and go for a full-fledged fight. So yeah, actually, he surprises me on move 1. He plays c5. In the previous game, I think he played g6. But okay, c5 was, I think, kind of a pleasant surprise, because now we're definitely getting a Benoni, and clearly white is going to have chances for an advantage here. And well, he's a pretty aggressive and risk-taking kind of player, so I kind of felt like he's going to give me some chances, and probably we're going to have a really sharp game. And that's exactly what happened. Like, this game was very, very complicated and very interesting. So I hope you guys are ready. Okay, I went c4, bishop g7, e4, d6, knight c3, and e6. So the point of black's move order, the point of all this was basically to get a Benoni, but he's delayed developing the knight to f6, so he's still getting the chance to put the knight on e7. Now the knight isn't necessarily better on e7, but it does have some advantages, the main one being that it supports black pushing f5, and if white doesn't really deal with this, then when black castles in this position and then plays f5, typically black gets really good play. Z Nation, yeah, you asked a good question. A lot of players do play without c4 in this position. They'll just play e4 and knight c3 like so. I don't think it's necessarily better. It depends. I mean, in some lines, yes. I think, for example, at least my understanding in the Old Indian, let's say, so in this position, or maybe this is the Czech Benoni, I get them mixed up a lot. These positions, the Levon Aronian opening, because he likes this one, then usually this position is better to get with the pawn on c2. So if black plays d4, c5, d5, e5, then I think white should not play c4 here, and then white should just play e4, d6, and knight c3. And play without the pawn on c4, and then use the square for the knight, bringing the knight here, sometimes putting the bishop here, etc. So yeah, I think this is kind of the case where white does that. In the move order we have here, I think it's kind of a toss-up. I think e4 is fine. I think c4 is also fine. Maybe e4 might be more ambitious, but c4 definitely leads to, like, let's say normal type of Benoni positions where white doesn't really have fewer options. I think both sides kind of have more options, and yeah, white still has excellent chances of fighting for the advantage here. Okay, so he goes e6, and I kind of understood what his idea was, because I had a similar opening against Grandmaster Kotanashvili in Gibraltar a few years ago. And in that game, the knight went to e7, and I had some problems. I think I just played like bishop d3, knight e2, castle, something like that, knight g3, and then I was just kind of worse out of the opening. Like black had got so much counterplay that it was a pretty difficult game. But then I analyzed that game. Of course, it was a few years ago, but I kind of remembered what I had looked at, and I remember seeing that when the knight goes to e7, it's actually quite interesting for white to just play h4, h5, which normally doesn't make sense if the knight is on f6, but with the knight on e7, it's actually quite effective, because the black has less control over the king side. So I said, okay, you know, this is the last round. I played knight e2. I usually like developing my knight to this square because I like putting my knight on g3 in this type of position, sometimes playing f3. Sure enough, he goes e takes d5, c takes d5, and knight e7. And yeah, you know, h4. I felt like I didn't know 100% that like this was gonna be good or not, but over the board it definitely looked interesting. And also, you know, I'm keeping in mind the fact that my opponent, again, he's a very aggressive, dynamic player. He's not going to be playing quote-unquote correct chess. He's not going to back down from a sharp battle, so he will give me chances. And so if he's playing some kind of, let's say, semi-sketchy line like a Benoni with knight e7, then the right thing to do is to try to play aggressively and try to punish it, not rather like play timidly and then slowly get outplayed. So I went for it. He didn't take too much time here. He just castled. He's like, okay, come and get me. If black plays like h6 or h5, it's kind of a concession, especially h5, because then white can play bishop g5, and this bishop is very annoying for black. Black never wants to play f6 here, and so, you know, here white doesn't even have to play for the attack. I can still switch and play positional chess, f3, knight g3, bishop comes out, and so on. So he just castles. He allows h5, knight d7. Here I was trying to figure out what to do. I really wasn't sure. I knew I probably did not want to play h6 at any moment, because white's idea here is to open the h-file and use the h-file as an attack. It would be nice actually if my knight could still go to f3 and g5, but yeah, unfortunately I had already committed to knight to e2, Eventually I decided on knight g3, which I think is reasonable. Maybe slightly better was to take on g6. Black probably takes fg, I would guess, and then go knight f4. And I think white has a very reasonable position. I mean, the king is awkward in the center, but let's say knight e5, bishop e2. It's kind of everything is still under control. I can even play knight e6 at some moment and force black to give up the light squared bishop. So I think white would have a small advantage here. Okay, instead I played knight g3. He goes a6, which is a useful move, because he's forcing me to take a decision quite early. Like, if I'm going to attack on the king side, then I might want to castle queen side, in which case I don't think I would want to play a4 here. But if I don't play a4 right now, then, well, he's going to get b5 and b4 in very quickly. So I ended up playing a4, and now it's going to be very awkward for me to castle queenside, because as soon as I castle queenside, b5 will be the immediate reply, and black is just going to get huge counterplay. So this position has really gotten out of control very, very quickly. Suddenly I'm committed to playing with my king in the center, and yeah, it's not my favorite situation to be in, to be honest. I mean, I like these types of positions, let's say against lower rated players, because I get a lot of chances to win the game quickly, but against strong, dynamic, high rated players, it's sometimes you feel like you're just gonna lose in 20 moves here with white, which, you know, could easily happen. This is like basically the last position I would want to get against someone like Nakamura, for example. I feel like it would just, even if objectively white is doing well here, it's very, very double-edged to play. Outsmiter asked, instead of a6, b5 immediately. It's definitely an idea for black. Here I don't see exactly what black is getting. Like, let's say I just play bishop takes b5. I mean, black gets the open b file, of course, so you get some compensation, but I'm not really sure if it's worth a full pawn in this case. And then white will just pull back to e2. And then, you know, one day I might just castle kingside and just say, like, okay, thank you very much for the pawn, and now we'll just play positional chess. And I'm a pawn up. Please show me your compensation. So yeah, I think I wouldn't hesitate too much there. So I think he played it correctly with a6. Okay, so a4, and he goes f5. Which is really definitely just lighting the board on fire. Yeah, actually, I mean, queen a5 there, just to keep this line going. This is definitely a move. I'm not really sure how much I'm worried about black taking on c3 here, so maybe maybe I would just go a4 here. I don't know, definitely a very sharp position, but if you take twice on c3, bishop d2, then you got your pawn back, but now white has a dark squared bishop, so it could be dangerous, especially with the h file still being ready to open up. So I don't know. I mean, again, some compensation, but I feel like black doesn't really have to rush to do this, because it's not like white is really threatening that much in the immediate. I mean, like, I can take and then play bishop h6, but doesn't really do a whole lot. So I still need a few moves here before the attack really picks up any steam. But okay, so he goes f5. He also doesn't want to waste any time. He's just like, let's get on with it. This was what I wanted. Apparently this is what you wanted, so let's just do this. I took on g6. Might as well throw this in, open up the h file. And yeah, this is a critical position. I mean, already I started spending lots of time. He hadn't spent that much time yet, but okay, eventually he was going to catch up. Eventually I decided on bishop f4 here. I was considering a lot of other moves. I really didn't want to take on f5 and something like this. I mean, it was possible. Bishop d3, but it just felt like my king has also been sometimes opened up. And And I don't know, I mean, the Stockfish doesn't seem to have any issues here with white. It says like plus 0.3 or something, but to me it felt like knight e5 is coming, and then, you know, rook drops back, bishop comes out. I really didn't like it. I just felt like, okay, the center is completely open, and why is my king on e1? Like, what exactly is my rook on h1 going to do against the bishop on h8? Not a whole lot. So I didn't like the looks of that. I think the best move objectively was bishop g5. And I considered this one for quite a bit. Eventually I just decided against it. I wasn't worried about f4 here, because after knight e2, white can kind of just pick up this pawn, and I don't think black will have a lot to show for it. I can do queen d2 next as well. I was more concerned about a move like queen e8, just like something sharp, but it turns out queen d2, white is still in control. Bishop comes to e2, the setup is nice, and maybe I castle somewhere, maybe I start thinking about bishop h6. White is still doing quite okay here. Okay, I decided on bishop f4. And my idea was after f takes e4 to just play queen d2. So I just give him the pawn, I don't care. I'm just trying to get my pieces out, and now I want to play bishop h6 and recapture with the queen. And I felt like this would be at least somewhat dangerous. I really wasn't sure what my chances are here, but to me it seemed like, okay, at least it's in the spirit of the position, and it's what I should be doing. Afterwards, actually, someone asked me, like, oh, what about bishop takes d6 here? And I kind of brushed them off. I was like, no, I didn't even consider this move, grabbing this pawn. And yeah, and like intuitively, I just felt like this is kind of going in the wrong direction, because it's like opening up so many queen b6 opportunities, or like knight f5. It just seemed knight e5, knight f6, something. It just seemed like this was just kind of asking for it, to be honest, and I thought it was way too risky. But yeah, according to Stockfish, no, this was like the way to go, and black is the one who has to prove that they actually have enough here. I don't know. I mean, I assumed my opponent had this covered, because like he's the one who took on e4, so clearly he has to, of course, consider what happens if white takes this move, and clearly he thought he's getting compensation there. So I just kind of took his word for it. I didn't really consider it that much and played queen d2, but maybe I should have. Objectively, bishop takes d6 would have really forced black to prove it, and maybe objectively he doesn't have enough. But yeah, it might have been kind of a bluff for my opponent, for sure. Or, you know, semi-bluff, because he is going to get play there. It's just a matter of whether he gets enough, and whether I find the right defensive moves. Okay, so he goes knight e5. And here I would like to play bishop h6, but the issue is this actually runs into a very strong shot e3, which is super annoying and a very nice resource. The point is, if queen takes e3, knight g4, and black is just winning material. I can't take, I mean, I can take with the pawn, but then my queen is blocked off, and now his knight on e5 is on an outpost, and he has knight g4 anyway, and this is not what white wants. I mean, the bishop on h6 will get traded, but the rest of white's pieces are just not going to be so useful. And if bishop takes e3, then he simply has knight g4 again, which is just super annoying, hitting the bishop, hitting f2, and black's king is actually super safe. Like, if I can't challenge the bishop on g7, I'm just not going to get anything. So I can't play bishop h6 yet. I decided to play bishop e2. He goes knight f5, so he's just going full active. Knight takes e4, taking back the pawn. Okay, bringing the knight into the game. Maybe I can play bishop g5 or knight g5 next. But to be honest, I was feeling very pessimistic about my position here, because I realized, like, I'm not getting bishop h6 in, and pretty soon my king is just going to be on e1. Like, what am I doing here? Like, queen e7 is coming, bishop d7, rook b8, b5. I mean, black has a million ways of like opening up the position here. So yeah, I wasn't happy here. And then after knight d4, I was even more unhappy, because now I have like concrete problems. Knight b3 is a huge threat. I can't play queen e3 trying to activate because of knight c2 check. So already this one is like super annoying to deal with. If I go bishop d1, I have to account for knight c4, which is also extremely annoying, and then everything starts hanging. So if I don't find the right move here, I realized I'm basically just lost. During the game I thought I might be lost until I came up with an interesting idea. Bishop h6 is possible, and I was considering this one for a while, but number one, black can play queen e7, and then if I take on g7, queen takes g7, I basically have nothing. His queen is just defending just as well as the bishop, and now he still has knight b3 in the position coming. So this looked pretty bad for white. I can't even castle, knight b3 check. But apart from that, he can also just take the rook. Like, he can go knight b3, and if I go queen e3, knight takes a1, bishop takes g7, he does not play king takes g7 and allow queen h6, which is actually going to be really dangerous, but instead he just has knight c2 check, and just killing the game immediately. So bishop h6 is just not working, and once I realized that, then I just felt like like, what else am I going to do? But then I realized I have another idea here, so I didn't give up, and I actually figured out I have something. I have bishop takes e5. And the fact that I actually even spotted this move was surprising, because normally I don't even consider giving up my bishop for a knight. But concretely, this is actually just the only move for white in the position. The main point is that when black has to take with the bishop, then my queen is getting to h6, and I'm actually generating some threats here. But if black does not take with the bishop, if black takes with the pawn, let's say, to try and keep the h6 square under control, well, then after bishop c4, it turns out black is just powerless to stop a d6 check, and white is actually just winning here. Now the rook on the h file is incredibly strong. The bishop on c4 is perfect. Black cannot blockade. b5, I just take it because the rook on a8 is going to be hanging, and yeah, black is just lost. So bishop takes c5, he's forced to take with the bishop, and I get queen h6, and now at least I have some ideas. It's always nice to threaten mate in one, and queen takes g6, you know, 2 threats, not bad. He goes bishop g7, which I felt like was kind of the critical defense during the game. And here I think I already had in mind some ideas. Crushing fatal blow. What about knight b3 in this position? At what point? Because after bishop takes e5, yeah, actually, definitely this is possible. I didn't really consider this one, to be honest. It kind of feels like it shouldn't be working. Like, let's say maybe white plays queen d1, and if you take on e5, then I'm taking your knight, and white is up a piece. If you take the rook, then I have time to take on g7, and then after king takes g7, okay, I can try to go for the attack, but at minimum I can just take the knight, and then white gets 2 pieces for the rook. So I would assume this is probably good for white. Just taking too much material, basically. So black is kind of forced to play bishop takes e5. Now queen h6, bishop g7, and yeah, I spent some time here really trying to figure out what to do. Like, I definitely thought about queen takes g6, but here I wasn't sure what to make of bishop f5, because if queen takes d6, he can either trade queens, or he can, I think he can even grab the exchange immediately. And yeah, this position felt very, very dangerous for me, because okay, I can take the exchange, but oh, actually, well, here he has bishop takes c3 check, and if I recapture with the pawn, he's taken with the knight. If the knight takes back, I'm losing the queen, so this is just losing. So okay, I can I can take on d8, but then he has knight b3 check, and double doubles Zwischenzug, and then I don't get the knight back, so I'm just going to be down a rook here. Okay, so even if I had a way to somehow get to the endgame down in exchange, it would still be bad because black's 2 bishops would just be really strong and the 2 rooks would be really strong, but I don't think I even get there, unfortunately, here. So yeah, queen takes g6, I wasn't thrilled about that one. I wanted to play queen h7 check and then some move, but of course here the issue is that we got this one check in, but rook h8 is a huge threat, so this is not a check that one should give without thinking. It's like you should have in mind what your idea is from there, because otherwise your queen could get trapped. I considered bishop h5 here. I thought this was quite interesting because here white actually gets to open up black's king and gets quite some ideas in. After takes, queen takes, it turns out white has at least a perpetual check. Like if king goes back to g8, we have queen h7. If king e7, we have queen g5 check. And if the king does not want to defend the bishop, black goes bishop f6, for example, then not the immediate rook h7, or actually immediate rook h7 works. You can also take on f6 first, rook takes f6, and then rook h7 check is going to be winning for white. So that was working. F4 after king f7, this is possible, trying to play like knight g5 check. Maybe black can get away with... No, rook h8 is probably not working. Knight g5. Oh, actually, knight g5, we can take this one. Take. And then pick up the rook in the corner. And seems like black is probably going to be keeping the extra piece, unless I was missing something. So yeah, I think this doesn't quite work. But it is a thematic move in the position, absolutely. Well, the issue, going back to bishop h5, the issue with this one was not so much taking. I was able to figure out that line, but I didn't see what to do after bishop f5. So this is the line I had an issue with, because now rook h8 is even more problematic. My queen is really trapped, and I just didn't see how I'm going to get out of this one. And then the engine points out a very strong resource here, g4, which is really fantastic. Just, you know, breaking down the light squares, and then after rook h8, of course, we're sacrificing our queen with takes on f5. Rook takes h7, takes on g6 with check, and then winning the rook on h7, and then white has a very reasonable position. I think the computer says white is like maybe slightly better here. Okay, black has to be like super careful not to lose. So this was playable. Like white is not going to be worse in this line, and it's always fun to play with like such active pieces, and everything's like so well coordinated. But yeah, I didn't really spot this resource. Eventually I did find something though. I played queen h2. So I back all the way up and I threaten knight takes d6, check. And then black cannot go back to g8 because queen h7 is a checkmate. So black would be forced to keep the king in the center. So yeah, the line I calculated was basically this: knight c2 check, king d2, knight takes a1, knight takes d6 check, king e7, knight takes c8 check, otherwise queen takes d6, rook takes c8, and rook takes a1. And I was trying to figure out this position during the game, and still had plenty of time, so there was definitely time to calculate. And it's like, okay, white is down in exchange for a pawn, but black's king is on e7. I felt somewhat optimistic about it, especially like I saw lines like, let's say bishop takes e3, black is trying to take the d5 pawn, white can go king takes e3, queen takes d5, bishop c4. Actually, not bishop c4. Let's throw in queen h4 check first. Black moves the king somewhere, and then bishop c4, and white's king is actually going to be quite safe. And maybe black's king is the one that's in danger. I wasn't really sure. So then I thought in this position, well, okay, black doesn't have to take on c3. He could also just keep the bishop and just play a move like queen d6 and just start developing a blockade on the dark squares. And then I felt like, okay, if he gets this, then white is really going to be hard pressed to show any compensation, because the king at some point can like walk to c7 and b8 and just escape to the queen side. In the long run, white's knight is just passive. Bishop on g7 is really strong. Like, I might just run out of compensation here and just slowly lose the game. So once we got to this position after knight c2 check, king d2, knight takes a1. Hey, Pasta Prego, thanks for following. Crushing fatal blow, I'm not sure which position you mean for rook takes f2, but yeah, that is a move that is possible as well, because the pawn might hang at some point. Okay, so in this position I just wanted to double check and make sure to see if I had any other options, because maybe I don't have to go for this position with the where I'm down the exchange and like struggling to find compensation. Maybe I have something else. Okay, there was a question in the chat. After bishop takes e5, knight b3, would rook h8 check be a good try? Yeah, I was thinking about it. The problem is there. I think black just takes with the bishop on h8, and we don't get queen h6 there. Let me just go back so everyone can see what I'm talking about. So here, had black play this like in between with knight b3, rook h8 check. So king takes h8, yes, this would be awesome, and I would be collecting my brilliancy prize, of course. But bishop takes h8. I think this kills the idea, and white just doesn't have the resources here, because queen and bishop are still hanging, unfortunately. But yes, that is always an idea to keep in mind. Okay, so yeah, I was thinking for more ideas. Yeah, queen f4 check, for example, but then it's like, okay, maybe black just plays bishop f5, g4, bishop e5. I really wasn't sure. Hey, Banyas, Beka, thanks for cheering, 100 bits. Yeah, sorry, Pasta Prego, I left that line behind already, but in that position, when black goes bishop takes h8, if we take on h8, the queen is still hanging on d2. So yeah, we don't have time, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe queen f4 check, king g8, exactly. Z Nation, this is a good response. Okay, so eventually I did find something interesting. So I played knight takes d6 check, king e7, and rook e1. And when I play this move, so for the record, I'm just staying down a rook. Like, because black can go knight b3 check, and I'm not winning the knight. Because if I go king c2, he's going to go knight d4 check, and then the knight is going to be back for good. So knight b3 check, I probably go king d1, and the knight is safe. So now I'm just like down a full rook, and I made like a quiet move, rook e1. So during the game, I was pretty skeptical that this was in any way working. I figured black must have something here, and yeah, but actually, you know, like it has some threats. So. For example, we are threatening some kind of discovered check, either bishop g4 check to cut the king off this way, or bishop b5 check to cut the king off from d7 from this angle. And in fact, we do have a threat. So we want to play bishop g4 check. If king goes to f6, which is kind of one of the only legal moves there, then queen e5 is mate. So in fact, black's king here is kind of caught in this little mating net. So the more I looked at it, the more I kind of liked my chances here. For example, let's say black tries, and you guys feel free to suggest defensive moves here for black. Like, what should black do? If black plays king d7, for example, just trying to get out this way, the king doesn't get very far. We have bishop g4 check, king c7, and knight f7 check. Hitting the queen, black cannot block, and white is just winning. I should note, if black takes on d6, actually white can go bishop g4 check. Or I think bishop b5 might even be stronger. But the point of this one is that black doesn't have a great way to keep the king in contact with the queen. So black has to go like bishop e5. Then white plays rook takes e5 check. And now again the king has to move. If king f6, we have rook e6 check, and white is at least winning the queen and should be doing quite well here. And if the king went back to, let's say, d8, well, then we have rook e8 check. Again hitting the queen, king has to go to c7. Now we can trade, grab this rook on f8, and in the end we actually, like, the material has suddenly been equalized, but white has this nasty pin on the back rank, and white is probably much better here, maybe even close to winning, pawn up, great position. So that line is actually working for white. Okay, but after rook e1, like, what else can black do? Rook takes f2 is definitely possible, but this runs into queen h4 check, so that has to be kind of calculated. And otherwise, it's hard for black to create a square for the king because I'm threatening all these discovered attacks. Couple other nice lines are queen b6, for example. Here white has a nice way to mate with bishop b5 check. King f6, again we go queen e5. So king d8. And then just lovely finish here, rook e8 takes, and knight f7. Oh, sorry, I made wrong move order. That's not mate. Ignore you saw that. Knight f7 check takes, and rook e8. I'm gonna edit that for the YouTube audience, so they'll never know a thing. This is the mate. Okay. Black can also go queen c7, but then white wins here in similar style. Let's say bishop b5 check, king goes to d8, and now we don't have knight f7 just yet because of queen takes f7, but white can throw in queen h4 check, and this one is actually a killer because now bishop f6, we're taking, and we're getting our rook e8 in the position. So yeah, I was really hoping for this. Okay, then while my opponent was thinking, I also considered he might go knight b3 check, king d1, and then something, because why not improve the knight? Suddenly I realized, like, oh man, how much better my position would be if instead of d2 my king was actually on d1, which it could have been had we gone back one move earlier, because my opponent for the first time in the game after rook e1 started going into the tank. Like, up to this point he didn't spend more than maybe 10 minutes per move at most, and here he was like going on 10, 15, 20 minutes, so clearly he understood the danger of the position. Yeah, suddenly I realized this rook e1 is not such a shot in the dark, it's actually a pretty dangerous move. And I really started regretting in this position after knight c2 check, not taking the second glance at the position earlier and finding king d1. So after knight takes a1, rook e1, or not rook e1, but knight takes d6 check first, king e7, and then rook e1, basically getting all of the same ideas in the position, all of the same attacking lines still exist, but severely reducing the amount of defensive resources black has here. So now knight b3 is no longer a check. There are no checks on the diagonal, and most importantly, rook takes f2 is no longer pinning the bishop. So now rook takes f2 is not even a move. I think white can just go either bishop g4 or bishop b5, and basically either rook e8 is happening or black is just getting mated here. So that was really, actually, that was very unfortunate because I felt like I had like a huge missed opportunity because I found rook e1, I just found it kind of one move too late. But what can you do? So after king d2 takes and rook e1, eventually he does play rook takes f2, which is the best move in the position. And it turns out it's not the only defense for black, because in other lines black has resources with like knight b3 check. But I checked with the engine the other line, and indeed it's winning. It's like minimum +2 with best play, but like white is breaking through there. So that was a miss. That was a pretty unfortunate miss on my end. But okay, I still felt like there's a lot of action in this game, so there was no reason to pout. I played queen h4 check, and now black still has to be super precise. Yeah, rook f6 is losing here. I believe the right way would be bishop g4 check. King kind of has to take on d6. I mean, king f8, rook e8, and then queen g3. Nice way to checkmate. So many nice mating patterns in this game, really. And the knight is actually contributing by defending this pawn. And you can't go bishop f6 either, because here the best thing for white to do would be knight takes c8 and queen takes f2. And material is actually equalized, but black's king here is going to be super weak on e7, and I think white just has a great position. King can run to c2, b1, knight comes to e4, and it's going to be bad for black. So yeah, after queen h4 check, and the queen is hanging, so king takes d6 is not an option. He plays king d7, which is the only move. Queen takes f2. And then he goes knight b3 check. So here I realized, like, I had already blown it before. Like I'd spent some time calculating the previous position. I realized, oh my god, king d1 would have been such a nice resource. And I was thinking about this position. So the obvious candidate was, of course, king d1, because why would you allow king c2, knight d4 with tempo? Makes no sense, right? But because I messed up in the previous position, like king d1 instead of king d2, I figured, okay, you know, let's not make the same mistake twice. Let's actually consider king c2. Maybe it's better for some reason. If it's not, I'll play king d1 and whatever. So yeah, I thought about king c2. It didn't really make sense, and I played king d1. Then, of course, after the game, I found out from Stockfish that indeed king c2 was a great move. Brilliant move, because after knight d4 check, king b1, it turns out white's king is just safe, and this is worth the tempo we gave back to black to get their knight back into the game. But really, it's a concrete thing. It's not so much something that we can understand with like chess principles. The main point is that now when black takes on d6 and tries to go up a piece, white has queen g3 check, bishop goes to e5, knight e4 check, important follow-up, king takes d5 only move, has to defend the bishop. And now really the key move that the engine sees in a second, but a human would not, bishop c4 check. So, okay, if I had seen this one, then yeah, probably maybe I would have gone for the line, but this one is kind of hard to see. Though it is funny that, again, I messed up on the king move there. The point here is that if black takes the bishop, we have rook c1 check, and the king is just getting potentially mated here. Black has to go back king d5, then we go rook takes c5, and we're going to be winning the bishop. Black's king is still in huge trouble, and I think black is just lost here. Maybe losing the queen somehow, like queen e5, rook d5 coming, but yeah, basically game over. So that was a hard one to find. I'm not really kicking myself for not seeing that one, but the previous one a little bit. I think I could have seen it. Anyway, I play king d1 here. King takes d6, queen g3 check, bishop e5. So I'm down a piece, but clearly I have some ideas because black's king is weak. And during the game, I felt like I should have enough compensation here for maybe some kind of draw, or potentially I could be even better, because his king is actually still very, very weak. Like bishop e5 here was the only move. King d7 would run into bishop g4, which is immediately bad. But here, I mean, the attack continues, knight e4 check. So he doesn't really have a choice. King takes d5. And now white did have a choice, because I could obviously take the knight with check, and that leads to a really interesting position. I also strongly considered queen d3, which I was really, really trying hard to make work, because on the surface, queen d3 check looks exceptionally dangerous. Black has to go knight d4 here. I go queen c4 check. This is kind of the big idea. Black's king is forced to advance to e4. And, you know, if you just saw this position at first glance, you know, or in your calculation, it's very easy to assume that white should have some kind of checkmate here. I mean, we have a discovered attack, double check available in the position. The king is on a light square. We have a light squared bishop, queen, rook. You know, even this pawn is useful. But I checked this position for several minutes and I couldn't find anything. And it turns out, like, okay, my best try is bishop d3 check. He starts running with king f4. Queen c1 check, kind of an important move to keep the king from getting away, but the king is kind of just has barely enough to get out. Rook e4 check, he can go king h5. I take on e5 with check, I get one piece back. In the game I was thinking about g5, Stockfish pointed out bishop f5 is actually better, and white just doesn't get enough. It turns out black has enough defensive resources here and is just going to end up a piece, and it's not working for white. So that was quite unfortunate because I felt like that was so close. And I mean, black is making a lot of only moves there. But eventually I realized, okay, I have to go for queen takes b3. Now if he takes the knight, this is probably too dangerous for black to even consider. I don't think bishop d3 check is that good. I think king c2 is the best move here. The point being is that now white's pieces are just much better coordinated and black doesn't have this powerful knight on d4 defending everything. In here I think black's king is just getting mated. We have queen f3 in the position, and then if the king ever goes to the h file, the rook will come to h1. Yeah, basically minimum black is just losing a bunch of material here and it's probably just getting mated. One nice idea is like bishop f5 is always met with g4. And like black just can't achieve any stability, can't survive with a king like this. Okay, he doesn't take the knight. He instead goes king c6, which is definitely the best move. But now actually material turns out to be equal all of a sudden. Like two minor pieces each. Okay, two bishops versus bishop and knight. So excuse me, he is still up one pawn, but I felt like okay, compared to before, I was down a rook. Being down one pawn is suddenly no longer so bad. And I felt like, okay, his king is still not exactly safe. I played king c2. He has to figure out how he's going to get his pieces out. I have bishop f3 coming. So I felt like black's problems haven't ended just yet. Okay, he ends up playing queen b6 here. I think this was kind of a necessary move to try and get the queens off the board, and it's forcing the queens off because b2 is hanging. Bishop f5, I think I would just play bishop f3 here and then g4 and just force him to trade. So queen b6, I play bishop f3. I think this is the best move here, and I realized I'm probably going to be worse in this endgame. I mean, I'm down a pawn and playing against two bishops, so it's going to be a tough battle, but I have a lot of initiative at the moment against the king and against this hanging bishop on e5. So I feel like I played this endgame quite well because it was close to being worse for white or even losing in some cases. And if I did not play it accurately, then I could have easily lost the game. So takes, bishop e6 check, king c2, and now bishop d5. And so this is a super provocative move. So clearly he's really trying to push this endgame for a win. The main point is if I go knight takes c5 here, which looks like it's a tactic that's working, he goes bishop takes f3. And now g takes f3, bishop g3 is a big problem for white. The rook is under attack, knight is under attack. If I go rook g1, he has bishop f2, and he's picking up the knight. And here after bishop f3, if I take this bishop, then he can actually take the g2 pawn. And after rook to g5, let's say, he can go bishop d5. And it's not clear that I'm going to be able to win back the g6 pawn. My knight is under attack now, knight d3, bishop e4. Seems annoying. You know, minimum he can take on d3, play rook g8, and get this rook endgame with a pawn up. And then who knows? I mean, clearly black will have some chances there. So I wasn't too happy about going into that. I wanted to find something where I have better chances or maybe just some kind of immediate draw. And actually I found some nice resources here. So I started with this move, knight d2. I think knight g5 was also possible, basically amounts to the same thing. Now I'm threatening the bishop on e5. I'm also threatening rook e6. So for example, if black goes bishop d6 here, then I'll play rook e6. And then if rook g8, which is another mistake, then I would play knight c4. It's kind of a very aesthetic position, but basically, yeah, black is very much in trouble here. Okay, should still be fine, but definitely no reason to allow this for him. So he's kind of forced to take on f3, bishop f3, knight f3, bishop d6, and now I get rook e6. So it's very important I keep the initiative going, otherwise I'm going to end up down a pawn for nothing. Rook g8, and I'm just in time here with knight e5 check, king d5, and rook takes g6. So this phase of the game, I mean, it seems like it's simplified tremendously compared to what we were looking at before, but there's actually a bunch of little tactics and details that always need to be calculated in these types of positions. So they're far from easy and actually very simple to mess up. If I didn't find like this series of like small tactics, then I might have just ended up down a pawn there. Okay, so here if he trades rooks, then it's probably going to be a draw, so he goes rook e8. Now my knight is under attack, and he wants to go rook e2 check and activate it this way, or knight d3 c4. So I play knight c4 myself, again using tactics here actually to play more strategically. The point is my knight is just good on this square. If he takes, I'll take on d6, and this rook endgame is just a draw. Neither side can really do much. And I get the tempo against his bishop, and also I get a nice setup because now my king can come to d3, kind of defending the knight, and everything looks nice and compact, and white should be doing all right. Still, he managed to pose some problems. He played bishop f4, king d3, b5, take, knight b6 check, king e5. And I actually calculated here a lot, like maybe as much as I was doing in the middle game, because if I'm not careful here, it's very easy to imagine a situation where black goes rook d8 check, the rook comes down to d2, maybe black plays c4 at some point, maybe puts the bishop on e5. At some point, you know, white might have to think about bailing out into like a endgame with rook versus rook and bishop, which I don't think I would really want to do. I mean, that can be a pretty tough defense. So I wanted to just try to find the cleanest way to make sure that I'm going to be holding this position, because it felt like it should be okay for white. So knight d7 check, king f5, rook f6. I'm kind of pushing the king away from the action, king g5, and rook c6. Okay, so here I had to see that rook d8 is not working because I take with check, and then the rook comes back to d5, and white is fine there. So instead he goes rook e3 check, king c2, rook e2 check, king b1, and he could take on g2, but then I'm going to be taking both of his queenside pawns, and then black is the one who has to think about equalizing. So he played bishop e3. He doesn't really have a lot of choices at this moment because his pawns are just kind of falling. I took on c5, he took on g2, offered a draw, and that was it. I mean, maybe white could play on here, but because I'm kind of closer to the b pawn and his king is kind of far away. But even if he really wanted to, he can just play bishop d4, rook takes b2 against anything, and just liquidate into a drawn endgame. Or okay, if my knight is on d3, he can give up his bishop for the pawn, and then I'll have rook and knight against rook, and which I'm not even guaranteed of getting. But even if I do get that, that's not like rook versus rook and bishop. Rook and knight versus rook is a lot easier to defend. I think this came up on a previous stream, but it's very little chances for the winning side. It's very hard to pose problems. I would be perfectly happy defending it against anyone and comfortably holding the draw. I think most players would. So I didn't really feel like I had any realistic winning chances here whatsoever. So I took the draw. I felt like it was a pretty fair result after all was said and done. But yeah, what a game, right? I mean, I felt like it was so complicated from like start to finish. I was really expecting to lose, to be quite honest, for the better part of the first game, the first chunk, because like, somewhere around here it just seemed like black's pieces were like taking over the position, but I managed to kind of pull it together and figure out like, okay, what is the most direct, dangerous way of posing problems on the king side? How can I create some tactics in the position? And yeah, I was very happy I found this idea with like queen h2 and knight takes d6, but Unfortunately, I spotted this rookie one idea a little bit too late. If I had found it earlier, I would have played king d1 here, and then reached this position to play rook e1, and then no guarantee I would have won the game, but yeah, I would have had great chances of playing a brilliancy here. So that was kind of unfortunate to miss, but ending on a draw against a strong GM, especially since he beat me last time, certainly wasn't too bad. And yeah, in the final phase, I got 2.5 out of 3, which was also quite acceptable, and maybe my best chunk of the tournament. So that was it. So overall, I finished on 5.5 out of 9. As those of you who are here all 3 days saw, some of the games were kind of clean. Like the previous game, I thought was a nice win, and my first round game was good. And then some of the games were pretty messy from start to finish. I feel like a lot of my issues started in the opening, so I think that's something I have to work on for the future, is being a little bit more careful in the opening and making sure that I'm well prepared to meet a lot of different lines, and not having to improvise too early, especially with black. If you get caught in some line you don't know, it can be very, very unpleasant to have to figure it out, like from move 5. But yeah, overall, okay, I did some things well too, and I can be happy with that. Alright guys, I think I'm gonna be wrapping up the stream here. My next tournament is going to be this round robin that's coming up in Minnesota, and that's starting next week, I think on Thursday. And then immediately after that, I'll be playing the World Open, which is always a huge tournament. And hey, I pawned my chess set. Thanks for following. So 2 tournaments coming up for me. The round robin and then World Open immediately after that. So that'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully I play some good games worthy of showing, because at this point I'm kind of committed to just showing all my games online, either on YouTube or through Twitch. But I'll probably continue doing it this way. In the past, I've usually just uploaded it straight to YouTube, but when I stream it, okay, it takes a little bit longer, but on the other hand, people ask questions, and some interesting lines and topics definitely come up. Will the round robin have any web presence? I'm not totally sure. I feel like I followed this tournament in the past, but I can't remember if the games are broadcast or not. So yeah, I guess we'll find out. I'll definitely tweet out a link or something if there are some live games. So if you're on Twitter, you can follow me there and stay tuned for that. Alright guys, I will be streaming again actually tomorrow night. I'm going to be playing a mini match, 4 games, rapid chess game 15 plus 10 against International Master. And we've decided to play the same opening in all 4 games. We're going to be playing the Sicilian Taimanov, specifically with the line bishop e3, queen f3. So we'll be doing a pretty heavy theoretical discussion there. And that'll be fun. That's going to start tomorrow around, so that's Friday around 6 p.m. Pacific time. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that stream. That'll be interesting. Other than that, I think that's it for tonight. So let's see. Maybe we can raid someone